inappropriate. I don't even wait. I'd be sitting over there looking at that comment like, yep, blocked. So you don't have to agree with me. I'm not going to block you if you don't agree with me. I'm not going to block you if you have a difference of opinion. I mean, you can argue from the perspective of a Republican and not make any sense at all, and I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Or you can come from the unrealistic expectations of a Democrat. If that's what you want to do, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. But if it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. And here on this show, one of the things I prioritize is making it make sense. So if you make it make sense, we'll rock with it. If it doesn't make sense, I will get you to clarify it, because if you can't make it make sense, and the only thing I'm going to point out is that doesn't make any sense. Now, this helps you with your decision making. So let's go ahead and dive into what we've got going on for today. Because the Supreme Court had dealt this stunning blow to presidential power earlier this month. Because on February 20th of 2026, in a landmark 6-3 decision out of 9 individuals, the highest in the land ruled that the president had overreached, apparently. They decided that he acted without authority and that he seized a power the Constitution explicitly gives to the Congress. The court invalidated the sweeping emergency tariff that have defined this administration's trade policies and collected hundreds of billions of dollars from nearly every country on earth. But in a move that sent shockwaves through the economy, the president had fired back, not with a legal challenge, not with an appeal to Congress, but with an immediate and furious retaliation. Within hours of the ruling, he found a new way, using an obscure provision of the 50-year-old law, to slap a new 15% global tax on almost everything, throwing international trade right back into chaos. In this story of a constitutional showdown, a defiant president, and an economic battle with consequences for every single American seems to be coming in. Oh, yeah, you're listening, Michael? I know we're going to be talking about this. Crooks usually do. Well, one of the funniest things about it is that people call him a crook, but you got to think, there are more laws in this country than most people know about. Some of them make no sense. A lot of them do make sense. There are so many laws that are still actionable today that are 200-year-old laws or more. People forgot that these laws existed. Our Constitution fundamentally allows us to do whatever we want to do, however we want to do it, as long as we're not causing unnecessary harm to somebody else or somebody else's stuff. Now, as it pertains to how the government runs itself, there are so many laws and rules out there about how it's supposed to run itself, but there are loopholes to how it's supposed to run. Because back when it was all originally created, which is why we have so many amendments, it's because that is adjustments from the original agreement. We're supposed to be taking turns running the country, not leaving it to a handful of people to do it every year for generations, not leaving it to family names to have second and third generation politicians sitting in the same chair, not to have musical chairs where people are bouncing around from place to place, still sitting in the same room. Just like jury duty, we're supposed to be proactively involved in Congress. We should have 501 different people in that seat every 2 years. We don't have that. Nobody even applies themselves to do that. And from what I understand, there aren't very many requirements to qualifying for a position in Congress. We just don't put ourselves towards that. I mean, take being the president. All you have to be is over the age of 35, an American citizen, and lived here for the last 15 years. Doesn't mean you can't be a felon. You can be a felon and still be president. Look at what we've got right now. So when we say that the crooks are doing stuff, it's not crooked that Donald Trump put something else back in play when there's a law that says he can do that. What's crooked is that a lot of times people bend and flex the laws and utilized them for their own benefit. So what was just found out was that the emergency tariff that is exclusively reduced for certain purposes was being utilized on a standard practice, and that's not what it was designed for. And while there is more than one law that allows them to implement this, the fact is that he used the wrong one. And since he used the wrong law and they called him out on it, he went and found the correct law. And he's like, well, I can still do this, just not the way I was doing it. Right. And we're going to get into the details of that today. Is there are still laws on the books that are outdated. Well, uh, like a person has to walk in front of a car coming into town. Well, okay, so you've got some laws that you can consider outdated, like you must pay the toll if you park your enemy, if you park your elephant by the meter, or back in the day, you weren't allowed to wear a mustache, a fake mustache, into certain buildings, or certain laws like um, can't fall asleep under a hair, or women cannot fall asleep under a hair dryer in a salon, you know, and those rules were made because back in the day when those rules were being conformed, that they had a widespread issue of something happening that led to that rule being made. Um, if you're walking in front of a car coming into town, then you're basically that law changes to walking with the flow of traffic. So while that law might be ideally considered outdated, it has been amended to the hitchhiking laws that we have today. So it's not really, but it's still enforceable. So if you're walking into town and you're not walking into town in front of a car, so whatever city and state that that law exists in, some really bored cop could literally come and give you slack behind that, potentially give you a ticket for that, have you sitting in a courtroom for that, and you would be pissed off because it's a lawful thing. The judge would be looking at the law books like, shit, I've never heard of this, but find it and then be like, damn, yes, this is enforceable. They may throw it out because it's ridiculous, but it is still enforceable. And as long as it's enforceable, that's one of the things that um, cause an issue. So let's see what this comment is. Okay, I'll put this up there. He says, single leading global cause of youth homelessness is apathetic and uncaring Christian parents who choose neglect over love for their kids' well-being, a dogmatic need to be right or in control. All right. Well, Jacob, I'm going to let that one slide, but don't make a habit of that in my comment section today because we're talking about the tariffs. We're not talking about Christians. But I am going to say that any parent, regardless of their religious beliefs, that are more focused on their authority over their child and then their child's best interest, where they have raised their child to do as I say, not as I do, and their children reach an area where they learn different information than what they were taught. That's when rebellious phases come out because now the children will do what they know versus do what they're told. And if they know that what you're telling them doesn't make sense, that's when your children are going to start combating your instructions because make it make sense to me. Why am I doing this? Or make it make sense to me. Why am I not doing this when this is commonly done? So while Republicans are harder on their kids than Democratic parents, while liberals allow their children to be more free, spirited, reckless, and dangerous versus the conservatives that demand structure, while Christians and Catholics and Seventh-day Adventists all have expectations of how to behave to represent their faith. And while most religions have similar expectations, the fact of the matter is that if you don't follow the authority of your family, you're going to find yourself in a different position where your authority will no longer protect you or provide for you. You will get cut out of the will. You will have your allowance cut. You'll have your credit card seized from your parents. You'll have your car repossessed from your parents because you didn't do as you were told. So I appreciate you putting that out there. But actually, the leading global cause of homelessness in the youth that we have right now is not from Christians. It is more to the magnitude of the lack of knowledge and skill set of our youth, where they're going into the work field without the skill set to survive financially. The lack of financial knowledge prevents them from being able to invest between 8 and 20 and learn how to build wealth between 8 and 20, so that when they get on their own at 20 years old, they know how to not just balance their checkbook, but how to gain wealth in more than one way. Because only knowing how to gain wealth by showing up and doing what you're told, which is the same rebellious servitude that you rebelled from, um, if that's the only way, you're going to get paid for your presence by the hour. And you're not able to make yourself financially successful that way. You're able to make yourself financially sustainable. But being taught how to live beneath your income instead of making enough money to spend as much as you want, then you learn how to have money left over, where you can use the money left over to build more wealth for you so that you don't have to work so hard. You can also learn from your parents and your grandparents if they were taught this information, and it doesn't matter what religion that you're in. So the leading cause of homelessness is the lack of financial knowledge. And then the second leading cause of homelessness is bullshit ass behavior and bad mistakes that leads to financial catastrophe, because you have to pay for the shit that you did or didn't do, depending on what situation that you're in. And now that you are in a homeless position, it's hard to bounce back from homelessness, because you need a state ID in order to get an address. You need an address in order to get a state ID. You need an ID to get a job, and you need an address to get the job. And you're going to need a bank account, and you need an address to get a bank account, and you need a state ID to get a bank account, and you need a job to pay for the house. So it starts becoming an infinite circle of not haves. And in order for you to break that loop of homelessness, somebody's got to give you a place to stay, help you get your IDs together, then help you find a job, and then use that job to pay for a place to stay. And since we don't have very many systems that are designed for that, on a long-term, ongoing basis, the fact of the matter is that we're in a position of holy shit, because what 5 to 10% of our population being homeless, looking at a few 100,000 homeless people, and it keeps going up 3% every year. But that's not today's topic. Today's topic is about the tariffs. So let's not make that a habit, Jacob. Back to the main topic. Um, this tariff situation is going to be impacting everybody. It's not going to be as big of an impact as you think, but there was a little bit of a hiccup between the 20th and the 25th. It's all happening in the shadows of a dangerous military shutdown here in America, and then the standoff that they have in Iran, where there's a clash over economic powers that could have catastrophic consequences even in that area. So here's what you need to know. It all comes down to this. Ahead of February 20th, 2026, when the Supreme Court delivered its verdict in the case of Learning Resources Incorporated versus Trump and Trump versus VOS Selections Incorporated, the central question was deceptive the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, let the president of the United States unilaterally impose tariffs. For the past year, the White House's answer has been a resounding yes. And after declaring national emergency, which he declared national emergency for a number of reasons, under national emergency, President Trump used the IEEPA as the legal justification for a breathtaking expansion of tariffs. Technically, with all of the fraud that we had going on and all of the corruption that we had going on Donald Trump's way into office, not because of Donald Trump's position in office, it was ideally classifiable as a state of emergency. And once the state of emergency rules comes into play, anything that you can benefit from state of emergency rules is utilizable, or at least that's what Donald Trump figured. But these tariffs weren't small targeted duties. These were massive sweeping taxes on imports from nearly every US trading partner, including special tariffs aimed at China, Canada, and Mexico, tied to the immigration and opioids, which drug trafficking is a problem and can be identified as a national emergency, and unlawful immigration can be considered an invasion of foreign powers that could be identified as a national emergency. Some people may disagree, but a compounding of issues is just like your check engine light coming on and then you having 3,000 codes on your check engine light when you scan the codes. It goes from being just nothing to being a cataclysm of events that comes together to make it important to get this fixed. And the expedited expectations to get it fixed could lead it to become an emergency. Something that could wait turns into something that needs to be done now. So by 2025, these tariffs had collected well over $160 billion and pushed the average US tariff rate to a historic high of over 15%, somewhere around 15.2 to 15.4%. The administration's argument hinged on just a few words in the 1977 law. 1977 was a long time ago for 2025. The IEEPA allows the president during a declaration of national emergency, so once declared, he has the power to regulate importations. Every time Donald Trump in 2025 declared an executive order, he also declared national emergency. The National Guard in Tennessee, national emergency. ICE in Minnesota, national emergency. The California incident that led to the curfew, national emergency. The borders not being protected on the north and south sides of the country, national emergency. Drug trafficking, national emergency. Now the immigration thing, national emergency. So repetitively, every action that he's doing being declared as a widespread national emergency triggers the claim that he can utilize this fund, this authority to demand these funds. Now, the White House lawyers argued that regulate implicitly includes the power to tax through tariffs. But in a stunning rebuke, the Supreme Court said, no, that's not how it's interpreted. And this was decided in a 6-3 majority opinion written by Chief Justice John Roberts. The court found that those few words couldn't possibly bear the immense weight the administration put on them. Roberts warned that Trump's reading would grant the power to impose unbounded tariffs and represent a transformative expansion of presidential authority. The court's reasoning hits at the very heart of the separation of powers. First, the simple text. The Constitution in Article 1 gives the power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excesses. That's exactly what it says, imposts and excesses, exclusively to Congress. It's their most fundamental power. Okay, RT, I'm going to give you a warning there. If you don't believe that I read the entire Constitution or I didn't read the entire Supreme Court ruling, then you can by far put the ruling in there. But if you attempt to insult my intelligence a second time, I'll block you off of the show. So you don't have to agree with what I'm talking about. And if you have any insight, you by far can put better information on the show and try to show me wrong. But if you're just going to attack my character as an individual, then you don't belong on the show. So that's going to be the last time that you come up on the show with something negative. Uh, the One of the things that you guys got to understand while you're up here being immature. First and foremost, I am probably 10 pages into a 2 hour to 3 hour show. There is a lot of stuff that's going on here. And the first thing that actually happened was, in fact, that there was a decision that the way the tariffs were being implemented was not supposed to be implemented that way. And overall, Donald Trump did produce an executive order to repeal those tariffs and then impose a different type of tariff in there. There is, in fact, a constitutional article that indicates that the Congress is supposed to have that authority exclusively, and that there was, in fact, a misuse of the verbiage of the constitutional right to impose tariffs in a national emergency. Now, if the young man that decided to try to derail the show has knowledge that proves that that's not the case, then please put that information on the show, because all of the information that's on this show is curated and all of it is duly researched. So if you know something that I don't know, definitely show me that, because nowhere in here, I did not read the entire ruling in my opening statement. I claimed that there was a decision, and that decision was based on the improper usage of, in their opinion, in a 6-3 vote, the implementation of tariffs. Now, what information am I missing, JT? Do you by chance have that knowledge, or were you just trying to heckle the show? Because I understand that there are a lot of individuals that find it funny to dive onto podcasts where people are trying to learn something and be completely disruptive without providing any factual information. I love factual information, and I take all challenges. It doesn't matter if you're left wing, right wing, if you're a politician. Please jump in and tell me something that I don't know. Matter of fact, you got the capabilities to click the link in the comment section, approve the mic, approve the camera. And if I see you in my green room, I can bring you on in real time, and you can actually explain in detail what the ruling was from the Supreme Court, so that you can show the people on the show exactly what you know, which is going to be far less than what I know. And Michael can verify, because everything that happens on this show is backed by 2 or 3 different people in the comment section that actually double check and reference the information. So by Michael not putting up a contradictory statement, he's the moderator. By him not putting up a contradictory statement, his silence indicates there is nothing else to say. And I know he's here because he just commented about the outdated laws. So it's not like he's not here to say, nope, that's not what it says, Xander. That's exactly what it says. Okay. Thank you, Michael. I make it a point to do my own research. So, just like the gentleman that came in here talking about the homeless situation, that person wasn't here when we first covered the homeless scenario, and I did a whole widespread budget on it and talked about how we could do away with homeless. I did like a 2-hour, 2.5-hour show about how we could do away with homelessness. We just don't. So, the topics that I cover on this show are curated for a reason, and they don't really know what they're getting themselves into. I mean, you don't have to like me because of my really good and awesome tan or my really pretty bookshelf behind me. But at the end of the day, the facts are still the facts. It doesn't matter where the facts are delivered, and it doesn't matter who's delivering the facts. The facts are still the facts. So let's get back into it. The majority of Congress stressed that when Congress has, or not the Congress, the majority of the Supreme Court decision stressed that when Congress has delegated tariff power in the past, it has always used incredibly specific language, like in Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, or Section 301 of the Trade Act of 1974. So the IEEPA, in contrast, doesn't mention tariffs or duties at all. And that is where the disruption comes from. So a plurality of the justices, Roberts, Grushas, what is this? I'm sorry, Grosh. So Roberts, Grosh, and Barrett. Those are three of them. Went even further, invoking the powerful major questions doctrine. And this doctrine says that for issues of vast economic and political significance, an agency, or in this case, the president, can't just claim authority from an ambiguous phrase in an old law. Now, JT, show me where that's wrong. If an action is going to transform the American economy, Congress must have clearly and explicitly authorized it. And there's no question that unilaterally imposing hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs is a major question. Can that be done by one person? Right? Chief Justice Roberts noted that for nearly 50 years, no president has ever tried to use the IEEPA to impose those tariffs, and a powerful sign that the authority was illegitimate. However, in my observation of it, just because nobody else tried to do it doesn't mean that it can't be done. It just means that it's never been done before. That's called breaking of tradition, not wrongdoing. But the decision was a direct constitutional check, signaling a new willingness by the court to constrain the president's push for unilateral power in his second term. Now, we put these checks and balances in place for a reason. Congress makes the decision, president vetoes it, Supreme Court overrules the president, the Congress steps in and makes another decision. Nothing gets done until the majority of people, including the president, agrees to something. So, special shout out to TF Fireball. Very appropriate question. Because originally the tariffs were set at about 5.2 to 5.4%, and I was going to talk about it later on in the show, but I do want to cover it since you're asking a question. When they redacted those tariffs, it dropped from 15.2 or 15.4%. It dropped 8%. So it was closer to like 7 or 8% for a moment, and then immediately spiked back up to 15% even. For a few hours or a few days inside of the week between the 20th and the 24th, the tariffs were low. And during that time, those businesses that were paying duty, taxes, and tariffs for imports and exports weren't having to pay so much. So they got a massive discount. That's like a bonus for them, but it didn't trickle down to the shareholders, and it did not trickle down to the consumer. So during that 4-day period, prices didn't drop, and the stocks are still fluctuating due to the issue that we have with DHS still not getting funded. We're still in a partial shutdown. So because it leveled back off at 15, it has technically gone down 0.2 or 0.4% since before the Supreme Court ruling. So now it is not low enough to really crash or negatively impact the market. But over the long term, balancing out at 15 even instead of 15.4, the abilities for a little bit more money to be made by the companies can potentially put a little bit more value to the shares of the stocks in the stock market. But it didn't just drop by 8%, right? Because if it would have went from 15.4 to like 7.4, that would have been horrendous. It would have been the market would have went haywire on more stuff would have started getting shipped. So any stocks that you would have been investing in that would have been getting profits from shipping, you would have made a ton of money off of that. But the price of products weren't going to go down. Typically, in our society, the way inflation works is that they raise the price, and if customers are willing to pay for it like that, it's going to stay that way. They only charge discounts when stuff don't get sold, when they start having an overflow of products. So as long as we're willing to pay extra money to get the last one, and as long as we're willing to pay extra money to get the first one, they have the capabilities of raising the price. If something happens with duty taxes and tariffs and other such things that gets lowered, the company doesn't pay as much money. And because the company doesn't pay as much money, they make more profits. Because the other idea is that if everybody else is charging similar prices, you are charging market level prices. So even if you can get it on a discount because something changed with politics, that doesn't mean that your customer needs to get it at a discount too. That's how big business makes more money. So one phone company like Samsung can raise their phone price to $1,800 for a brand new Samsung. And what'll happen is their direct competitor, iPhone, will raise their phone up to $1,850 because people, if they're willing to pay $1,800 for a Samsung, you got a plenty of people who don't know that Samsung is a better quality than iPhone that will pay an extra $50 just to say they have an iPhone. So it's really, really wild, but I'm glad that you asked that question. The clarification. Michael says the Trade Act of 1974 created a fast-track authority for the president to negotiate trade agreements that Congress can approve or disapprove. Right. Now, according to that observation, the president can negotiate trade agreements. And if the trade agreements are ideally the imposition of tariffs, Congress could disagree with it, but Congress wasn't involved at all. So unilaterally doing that still would go against that Trade Act of 1974. So that's what they were discussing in the Supreme Court, that he can't use the IEEPA emergency laws to just proactively produce extra fees. Now, there's some other stuff that we're going to be talking about here, which is why he was able to put that 15% back in less than no time. So swing with us because we're going to be covering a lot. Make sure y'all like and subscribe as we go through here. The dissent, penned by Justice Thomas and joined by Justice Alito and Kavanaugh, argued that the power to regulate importation was indeed broad enough to include the tariffs, as we just discussed. But Justice Kavanaugh, in his dissent, also raised the specter of massive economic disruption, warning that the government may be required to refund billions of dollars of importers, or billions of dollars to the importers. Right? So the ruling invalidated Trump's entire IEEPA tariff structure, the broad global tariffs that we all know today. The targeted tariffs on immigration, all of it, gone in an instant. It was a victory for the importers who brought the case, but it was a victory that would be incredibly short-lived. The president's reaction was immediate and furious. In a press conference just hours after the ruling, Trump denounced the decision as terrible. And he launched personal attacks on the justices, including his own appointees, calling them fools and lapdogs. And he did imply to traitors to his administration, and accusing them of their disloyalty. Behind the anger was a clear message of defiance. He's a billionaire. What are you going to do? So acknowledging the court had limited his power under one law, he vowed to use other legal frameworks and insisted that he had great alternatives, of which he did. That's why it took him a few hours to respond. He had to make sure that he was not going to be talking complete rubbish this time. He wasn't bluffing either. That same day, Trump signed an executive order formally revoking the illegal IEEPA tariff usage, but that was just to clear the desk. While he did authorize the immediate, as soon as possible, cease and desist of collections under this tariff, he did not, in his executive order, document in any way, shape, or form any form of refund that was related to the collection of tariffs under the IEEPA usage. So, as it stands, until further notice, that money is just gone. Now, the real move was the retaliation that happened immediately after. A new presidential proclamation imposing a brand new global tariff. This time, he wasn't using the IEEPA. He was reaching for a different, more obscure tool. Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, which is what Michael was just talking about. Suddenly, a law most trade experts hadn't thought about in decades was the most important statute in the world. Section 122 is titled Balance of Payments Authority. It was written in the 1970s, a time of anxiety about the stability of the US dollar. The law gives the president temporary authority to impose and import surcharges of up to 15% for a maximum of 150 days to deal with what is called a large and serious United States balance of payments deficiency. We have trillions of dollars of debt that would qualify. 150 days isn't all that long, though. This was the powerful alternative. Citing this authority, he first announced a new 10% global tariff on most imports, scheduled to begin February 24th. But within a day, he raised it to the full 15% allowed by the law. In effect, Trump had single-handedly restructured and resurrected his original tariff wall, defying the Supreme Courts by simply switching legal justifications. The strategy is both clever and audacious. Unlike the other trade laws, Section 122 is designed to be fast and blunt, requiring no lengthy investigations. However, the move is legally perilous. Many experts immediately argued that Section 122 was designed to address a balance of payments crisis, not a balance of trades deficit. And they're not the same thing. The new tariff also has a huge limitation: the clock. The 15% surcharge can only last for 150 days unless Congress extends it. This sets up a dramatic countdown to the July 24th, 2026 date. Now, if Congress does not agree with that, we're likely to see the tariffs go back down to whatever the regular amount is. From what I understand, since Donald Trump is setting a 10% base and then raising it to the 15 after the 150 days, it should drop back down to the 10. However, that does not mean that he does not have the rights and capabilities to reimpose that 15% for another 150 days, 24 hours later, which out of 301 days, he could ride that wave because the clock is only limiting him to 150 days at a time. There I have not read anywhere in the article that prevents him from re-implementing it instantaneously, or um, how many times during his term it can be applied, how many times during a fiscal year it can be applied. But considering the fact that once it applies, it can only exist for 150 days straight. On the 151st day, it's not there, but on the 152nd day, it can likely come back and ride it for another 150 days. So currently, at that point, the president must either convince Congress to keep his tariff where it is, or the global trades will face another cliff's edge. Now, the president has been told by the highest court that he could not unilaterally impose his vision of trade policies. His response was to find a new door to kick down. And he is kicking doors down like Test. He is knocking them doors down like Kane. He is hitting them with the big boot like the Undertaker. He is just knocking doors down. And it's just like, what can you do to a man who always finds another way? Not much. When you say I can't and I say prove it, that is when you really start seeing your freedoms at play. Probably one of the best things that a Republican can claim about themselves right now is that you can really push the envelope. For conservatives, you're really pushing the envelope of the law so far to the edge of the table that you had to get another table. He said, is Dow Jones an example of the negative effects from Trump tariffs? Dow Jones is down 800 points. The Dow Jones is negatively impacted by the shutdown. It would not be negatively impacted by the tariffs. It would be because you have to understand that international travel is impacted right now because our federal agents are no longer being paid to run the airports. You also have a lot of businesses that were being funded by the federal government, those government contracts. Those individuals are not being paid by the federal government. You also have the mom and pop shops and local stores that were strategically positioned next to federal government branches that no longer have government employees in them. And as a result, because there are no government employees in them, because they're furloughed, meaning unemployed, they're at home right now. Those businesses are no longer making money yet again. So it's down 800 points specifically because there is a large change in transition of currency in the economy right now since the 13th of February, which been a little over 12 or 13 days by now, where the market is going to potentially bounce back um, after the shutdown is over. But they've got to finish with this argument, and then they got to finish with the DHS argument, putting body cameras on ICE agents and making them take off those ski masks so that they're not murdering people and not being able to be identified, beating people half to death or shooting at them unnecessarily simply because they're angry. Because while they do have a right to be out there doing their jobs, it's their jobs that they're supposed to be doing, not antagonizing the crowd, not forcing people to keep moving or anything to that effect. So while they're not wearing body cameras and they're covering their faces with masks so they can't be identified, the Democrats are not going to approve the budget for Department of Homeland Security, and they're not going to allow. That's going to prevent TSA agents from getting paid, and that's going to negatively impact the market. It's a trickle down effect. But if you look at the S&P 500 and you see how the S&P 500 is not crashing, and you see NASDAQ is not crashing, 1 out of 3 markets is not something to be terrified about. But you do need to pay attention to all of the stocks that you have in your portfolio. Looking at a lot of the ones that we have in our core satellite that's going across the bottom of the screen, if you're looking at us from 16 by 9, well, yeah, 16 by 9, or at the top of the screen if you're looking at us from 9 by 16. The majority of our stocks are not being negatively impacted by the shutdown, but there are some that are going to be impacted by it. He said, walk tall and carry a big stick. That's one way to do it. That is definitely one way to do it. The immediate result of this 1-2 punch was economic whiplash on a global scale because it happened really quickly. For a few brief hours, American businesses believed a massive tax had been lifted. Then, just as quickly as it happened, it was slammed back under a new name, creating a lot of chaos and confusion for a lot of individuals. There we go. So Dow Jones lost over 800 points. The S&P dropped 7% or 1%, and Nasdaq fell 1.15 or 1.1%. Yeah, because that's a percent button. 1.1%. So it's not a catastrophic failure. And when did that drop happen? Today? Let me know, Michael. When did that happen? Today? Because today, the end of business day today. So last week's stock market, we were doing all right. But 1% is not that bad because you have to understand that we have a fluctuation. Now, had Nasdaq and the S&P 500 fell by 700%, that would be something to be concerned about. Had they dropped 55%, that would have been something to be concerned about. But a 1% dip, that is a fluctuation, and that is a standard fluctuation. It is not catastrophic failure. Typically, anything over 3% is something to be concerned about. When we had the crash between October and November, not really a crash, but definitely a dip, a huge dip, we had lost somewhere between 7 and 10% over the course of 6 weeks of the country being shut down. And it came back. The majority of it came back, but it didn't come back enough before we went back into another semi-shutdown. But since it is only the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, that is impacted by that, the 1% drop is not going to be a 1% drop for long. And 800 points on the Dow Jones is not, it's a big drop when you think about 800 as a 1-to-1 ratio, but it's not that big of a drop. The majority, like I said before, a lot of the shares that we're following on our core satellite platform is not impacted by the shutdown, and it is not impacted by this tariff thing that fluctuated over the course of the weekend, basically, between last week and this week. Because what's today? The 26th, the 23rd. So we've been dealing with over the last week between the 20th and tomorrow. We're looking at not that much has changed. So it really basically took a dip like last week, Thursday or Friday, when the person jumped up onto the show, and it got put back almost immediately. So the first thing that we're looking at right now is the fallout from the Supreme Court's decisions. With the IEEPA's tariffs declared unlawful, the big question became what happens to the money. Now, the U.S. government has collected as much as almost $200 billion under the law. The court now says didn't grant that authority. And the logical conclusion, as Justice Kavanaugh noted, is that the government may have to refund every dollar. But the court's opinion was silent on how, leaving that monumental task to lower courts and creating years of likely litigations for importers seeking refunds. For a moment, it seemed like prices might fall, but that relief never arrived. The president pivoted to Section 122, changing everything very quickly. And the old complex system of IEEPA tariffs was replaced overnight by a new uniformed 15% surcharge layered on top of whatever pre-existing duties already applied. Existing tariffs that weren't based on IEEPA, like those under Section 232 for national security, remained in place. the net effect is that the average US tariff rate essentially snapped right back to where it was before everything happened. And before the ruling, the trade weighted average tariff was roughly around 5.4%, and the court's decision briefly dropped it. But the new current tariff is about 15% of global surcharge that pushed it right back up to where it was before, right around 15%. So the economic pain and market distortions are back, just under a different legal name. And this has a profound consequence for American consumers. Tariffs are taxes on imports, and their costs are overwhelmingly paid by domestic consumers and businesses through higher prices. A 15% global surcharge means higher bills for American families. The move also invites immediate retaliation from America's trading partners, reigniting the trade war on all fronts. One moment, a path to lower prices that seemed to open up. The next moment, the door slams shut. This whirlwind of events, in more than just a fight over trade policies, becomes a constitutional stress test, colliding with high stakes foreign policy crises. The backdrop to this domestic legal battle is a dangerously escalating confrontation with Iran. And since January of 2026, the US and Iran have been in an acute crisis triggered by a violent crackdown on anti-government protests in Iran. If we didn't learn in Minnesota, should learn in Iran. Now, in response, the United States has begun amassing air and naval forces in the region at levels not seen since the 2003 Iraq invasion. I want you to marinate on that for a second. Protest in Iran has led to air and sea forces currently under DHS unfunded because they ain't getting no paycheck. Our military personnel in certain areas aren't getting paychecks, and they're being deployed in quantities larger than our highs that occurred back in 2003, with officials warning Tehran to make a deal or risk an attack. I don't know, man. You telling me that I'm gonna go to another country with no paycheck and risk my life because they spray painting stuff over there? Oh no. I'm just gonna invest in military stuff so that I can get my dividends. Michael said, first worried about AI is shaking up industries. Investors sold shares of companies that could lose our, I guess, position to AI tech. Second, confusion over President Trump's tariffs. Well, the first one wasn't the AI shakeup. The first one was the real ID mandate that made everybody who was going to remain in America have to renew their identification and get that star on their state license or state ID or their driver's license. Then the second shakeup was, and you think that's not a shakeup, but they made it mandatory that you have to have that type of identification card to travel with if you are not utilizing a passport or passport card. That interfered with people's ability to travel, because if you don't have that star, you could miss your flight being interrogated by TSA before you get on your plane. And a lot of times they don't have the requirement to put you on another flight. And that's going to be at your expense. Then the next shakeup that they had was the mandatory immigration thing. They were taking American tax dollars and paying the $1,500 a person to get the fuck out of the country voluntarily. Then after that, now they're doing the mandatory you gotta leave thing. All of that happened before the AI shakeup. And that's the second AI shakeup, because the first AI shakeup, where they were automating everything and replacing real actors with AI likenesses because their image has become branded and owned by the industry that they performed in, the AI thing started becoming mainstream when we started talking about AI in movies and TV shows and other such things. Then we had the AI shakeup, another AI shakeup, where we started talking about building these machines. We had the shakeup about the driverless cars and all of this other stuff. We even covered a show about whether or not you can get a DUI by riding in the back seat of a car that has no driver in it if you were drunk in the back seat because you're not operating the vehicle. The laws related to DUI is that you personally have the ability and responsibility to operate the vehicle. But if it's a self-driving car, who's driving the car? A lot of questions came up about that. Then we had the riots here in America, and that keeps throwing the economy into a frenzy because it's different states at different times during different invasions. First California, then Tennessee, then Minnesota, that is causing uprises. And all of that happened after Canada stopped buying alcohol from America, which put us into asunder almost a year later. So many people are losing their jobs because they're not importing billions of dollars of alcohol to Canada. Canadians drink a lot. And now we've got this second confusion over tariffs, because the first confusion over tariffs was the 150% tariffs against China, and they brought it all the way down to like 25. Now he's talking about 15, and then he's hitting them with this extra stuff going on in the back end, because tariffs was a big deal the first and second quarter of 2025. Then it became a big deal in the third quarter of 2025, and now it's a big deal again in the first quarter of 2025. We're gonna have a lot. We're gonna have a lot of issues, but as long as he's keeping the market volatile, we can trade heavy. Will the star be yellow and worn on the sleeve? I don't know. As long as it's not a red swastika, I don't really mind. Now, Washington led out and set of minimalist demands when they went over for negotiations to Iran, ending all uranium enrichment, limiting missile ranges, and halting support for regional armed groups. These terms, many in Tehran view as a demand for surrender. Clearly, we're going over there to get precious minerals, the same way we were back in Ukraine for precious minerals. The same way we were in Iraq for oil. The same way we were in Venezuela for oil. Y'all got to pay attention to what's going on. If y'all invest in them mining stocks, when they start mining over there, y'all going to start seeing some fluctuations on your portfolio. The most important news, that the U.S. beat Canada in a hockey game. I'm going to be honest with you. The fact that we beat Canada so much in hockey, that's not news. That's like a historical fact. That's almost like, that's like the 19th Newton's law is like Canada will lose to America. So home and away games. I'm surprised they even let us go over there and play. Be like, no, you messed over our alcohol. You don't touch our ice. That's what I'd be wondering. Special shout out to FX Trader. Now, while tense indirect talks mediated by Oman began on February 6th, both sides remain postured for war. So everybody's getting their troops together and they're ready to play battleship for real. It is going to be in the middle of this standoff that the Supreme Court's ruling landed, directly impacting one of the president's primary tools of the foreign policy, which was the IEEPA statute. And the very law the court just limited is also a key legal basis for imposing economic sanctions and pillar of the maximum pressure campaign against Tehran. Not being able to imply that sanction and be able to just jack up the price as much as possible limits his control, because as a billionaire, money talks and bullshit walks. So instead of sending our military forces to other countries and demanding that they comply and cooperate by risking the lives of our troops, instead he just taxed the enemy until they folded, because you won't make money on our land if you're not going to follow our rules. And since we spend the most money around the world, it made sense to utilize that particular method, because you had less American soldiers dying at war and more political arguments being done at a discussion table where money will pass hands and everybody will be satisfied, or at least half of the room will be pissed off, but nobody loses their life. Hit them in the wallet, don't hit them in the face. Supreme Court put a stop to that. He said we got Space Force. I mean, we've got that. He's still putting what, $600 billion towards that Golden Dome of America. I'm not too worried about whether or not missiles hit the United States, but family members in the military that are now being deployed into other countries because Trump can't put a large tariff on the country anymore, that kind of changes the negotiation strategy. If you played chess using Monopoly money, I could buy your move from you, and the person who ran out of money lost the game. You would find that you would move less pieces and make more financial transactions, because the more spaces you can own without a fight, the more of the board you can control. But when you can't spend any money to negotiate advancements, or you can't charge any money to allow or force the negotiations of expansions, you now have to use military might. There's two ways somebody's going to cooperate with you. You're either going to beat their ass or you're going to tax them. That works in the streets. That works in criminal underworlds. That works in mafia. One way or another, it's going to get got. The Golden Dome will be a lot of gold for the weapons manufacturing. Actually, the Golden Dome of America is just named that. The Golden Dome of America is a bunch of satellites over the United States with at least missile capability, if not missile and laser capability, where they can protect us from missile attacks from other countries. And the pattern that they cross over the United States allows for a reasonable number of anti-missile missiles over the American territory, seemingly at all times, for that $600 billion. It's not going to interfere with travel. You're not going to see the dome with the naked eye. You might be able to see the satellites if you have a really good telescope and you know where to look, but it's not like you can throw a rock and hit it. It's not like you can rope climb from it. It's just called the Golden Dome of America because gold is like one of the most precious metals next to platinum. Actually, gold is more valuable than platinum, irony. And then on top of that, identifying it as a dome as if it's going to shield America from something like an invisible force field kind of gives it a thoughtful meaning to it, but nothing's being made out of actual gold. We don't have enough gold on the planet to cover the United States in a fortress of real gold. It's not going to happen. And if you understand, the average person would spend most of their time chiseling on the infrastructure, shaving the gold off if they were using real gold, and then going to the nearest pawn shop and get paid off of it so that they could cover their bills. You would have to have guards covering that golden dome on both sides of the wall forever to prevent from losing the structure of the dome. So it's not really a golden dome. It's just called that. Is a use of power as a moving fence. Yes, using the pawns, he was using money as a moving fence, and now he has to use the pawns, which is the U.S. Army, Navy, whatever, as pawns to move that fence further in the direction that he wants it to go. So that's going to be one of the frustrations. So by ruling that the president can't invent vast new powers from vague languages in the IEEPA, the court has signaled that his ability to wage economic warfare might not be as unlimited as he might have thought. You never know until you try. So I got to give it to him for trying. Always saying I can't put you in a position where you limit yourself from succeeding. You either can and will until somebody else gets in your way, or you don't want to and you don't. I can't is not supposed to be in your dialogue when you start talking about your capabilities. You can, you just choose not to. Or you can, it's just that somebody is slowing you down. You're getting interference. And just like somebody stopped him from trying to do it one way, he went and made it happen another way. So the president's furious reaction and his immediate pivot to Section 122 is a direct challenge to the spirit of that ruling. It is going to threaten the laws as a menu of options to achieve a desired outcome, setting the stage for another race to the Supreme Court. But this clash now carries a terrifying new risk because experts warn that a president who feels the courts are tying his hands on an economic pressure, who is engaged in a high stakes standoff with a rival like Iran, and who sees judicial defiance as a personal affront, may be more likely to reach for more military options to project that strength. If you let the man do his job the way he was running his businesses when he wasn't going bankrupt, you will see results without sacrificing soldiers. You restrict him from his capabilities to utilize money to win wars instead of utilizing troops to win wars. You're limiting the options, because if the goal is to acquire resources from other countries by any means necessary, then the less self-sacrificed way, which is amend the laws and tax the fuck out of everybody, is the best way to achieve that. But without amending all of the laws and following all of the rules, sacrificing soldiers will accomplish the same goal. You just got to ask yourself, was it worth it? Stopping him from winning this argument through finance, was it worth it? The dynamic creates a genius risk of a catastrophic miscalculation. The conflict is no longer just about the tariffs. It is about whether the system of checks and balances can hold against the president determined to push the boundaries of his authority. And while the nation drifts closer to a potential war, we have to ask ourselves, are you ready? If you haven't started stacking up on yours, you better start trying to put that into your budget. Make sure that you can get some. Your Second Amendment, while all of those anti-Second Amendment folks was out there causing all that ruckus out in the street, if you go grab you a few dozen Second Amendments and put you some safes in some places that keep your stuff safe, whisk and never, this situation ends up on home turf, you will have the capabilities to do something about it. There is a strong possibility that there will come a time where you will have to bring your Second Amendment with you and put it in the trunk of your car and ride it with you, put it in the rack in the back seat and ride it with you. There will come a time where you're going to be in Walmart and everybody going to have an AR-13. And that's the only way that you're going to be able to rock that rock. You're going to be getting a bunch of groceries, and you're going to have everybody going to have assault rifles. That's going to be the way it's going to be. We're going to end up in that situation. If you ain't ready for it, you just be unprepared. You got to figure out how you're going to eat. I'm not talking about some conspiracy. I'm not talking about some apocalypse now. I'm not talking about something it's the end of the world as you know it. I'm saying that when countries do go to war, the war isn't always on one side. We have been lucky since World War I to not have direct conflict on our own turf outside of the 9/11 attack. We do not have ongoing military insurgents annihilating American civilians on our territory yet. But that doesn't mean that it won't ever happen. And one of the main reasons why the Second Amendment Constitution was created was so that we, as American citizens, can defend our own country on our home turf. It's not about blasting at somebody with a Glock switch or hunting down your neighbor because they slept with your wife, or road rage and gunning each other down in traffic because you wanted to cut somebody off and they didn't let you merge or whatever. It's about having the capability when the United States is under attack to defend our country from foreign invaders. And we're not talking about the people who climb the wall looking for a good job and a safe home. We're talking about the people who are going to bring their own Second Amendment, and they're going to use that to suppress our ability to exist in this country. That has the capabilities of happening. And the more often that we utilize our military forces, the more often we pressure test opposing alliances. Because all it takes is 2 or 3 countries that don't agree with our decision to come together with unified forces, and we will have our hands full. Doesn't mean we don't have our own allies, but it does mean that there is a strong possibility that a third world war can come from utilizing military powers to argue. When the argument is what we call the Cold War, where money is being passed around and products are being overpriced and stuff to that effect, the battle over trade, that's safe. Like worst case scenario, you get a Tesla overpriced. But when you start talking about pushing U.S. troops all over the place, that's not safe. Is that America has been at war since the Constitution was born. I know, but has America been under a direct attack by feet on the ground insurgents that are gunning down everything that they see? No. We have unilaterally done more killing each other than we have been getting killed by somebody else. The most conflict that we have seen is on TV when we're watching our troops dismantle somebody else's country. But if we experience on our home turf what they experience in their countries when we're blowing stuff up and wastelands are being created and then $13 million is being provided to rebuild what was destroyed. Could you imagine what kind of damage would have to happen in the United States for us to spend $13 million a week rebuilding from explosions and gunfire? I mean, you think we was in a quarantine scenario when we had COVID. Well, we lost less people during COVID, during the entire time of COVID, than what we lost with people having the flu in one season. They recorded what, 520,000 or so. They didn't record the whole population. 520, but we lose what, 52 million a year worldwide from the flu, and they recorded something less than 1 million for COVID. worldwide. Whole everything was shut down. Could you imagine America under fire? Bro, no planes are launching anywhere. No boats are launching anywhere. No shipping containers launching anywhere. Goods and services would stop everywhere. People would run out of work to do at their jobs because there's nothing to sell. If it ain't coming from Canada, we ain't getting it. Could you really imagine that? That's where we're headed. And that's before we even have attacks on ground. Because remember World War One, when Germany was destroying everything that was coming to America and Mexico? Canada got involved back then. No country can invade the USA, even from Canada. It would be very difficult. See, I'm going to disagree with you on that. It is highly probable the circumstances can occur. Typically, coming through Mexico from Panama, because Panama doesn't have any beef with anybody, that insurgents can drop down and then they can commute, and then the battle would happen at the border. Uh, can a military base like be set up in Canada and then march down from Canada? Probably not. But I mean, if you have a group of individuals that are not being checked on Canada's borders, it's a strong possibility that a downward swing could happen. But you can also have some subs pop up over by New York. Because I mean, the best place to start a war is at the capital. So I mean, the irony is that it is highly possible. It just hasn't happened. Look, Vietnam, exactly. It is highly possible. It just hasn't happened. And the reason why it hasn't happened is because typically we send everything that we can muster over to somebody else, and they're on the defense. And that's why it hasn't happened. But that doesn't mean it can't happen. If we're paying attention to somebody else, and this is what I said, stress testing allies and alliances between opposing forces. Anybody that's allied with Iran that ain't over there in Iran, if they decide that they want to sneak attack, you've been in a street fight before. You might be able to handle 5 guys, but somebody's going to hit you in the back of the head. The first country to hit America in the back of the head will be boots on the ground, and we would have the Second Amendment protect ourselves. So you have to make a clear and conscious understanding that just because it's never happened before doesn't mean it can't happen, and just because it's never been done before doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. So when Donald Trump pressure tested the IEEPA, the way he did it might have not have been worded correctly, but he tried it. Just because it's never been done before doesn't mean it couldn't be done. It just the way he did it for what he was doing it for, it didn't fully validate. But he tried it because nobody else did. But just like he tried that, somebody else can have a plan B, and that plan B could, like I said, it could lead to a few 100,000 individuals that we didn't know. Because remember, up until Donald Trump started doing the deportation, we had almost 200,000 people a month entering the United States. We had over 200,000 people a month entering the United States without documentation. No, America. Well, okay, so America does have like 400 million weapons in the basement, but we only got like 385 million Americans, and there's probably 30 or 40% of them that are anti-gun. So I mean, even if there's 400 million weapons in any one location, certain weapons are going to be eliminated from the discussion because we're not going to fire missiles on ourselves. So you're going to be left with hand-to-hand combat and assault rifles and handguns and everything to that effect, and you're going to be looking at probably 200 million fire, but out of probably 175 million Americans willing to utilize that, you really can only shoot one per person at a time and accurately hit your target. You're probably only going to have close to 100 million that aren't already deployed somewhere else that's willing to knock this back. And that number gets reduced when you start talking about the actual American citizens that were born and raised here, not the American citizens that got their green card and their passports to come over here who don't have firearms. So you're probably looking at something closer to like 98 million Americans that'll be here in the country trying to make it happen. But 98 million is a lot of people to go against with like 100 or 200,000 individuals that's starting a siege somewhere. So the siege itself is the possibility of occurrence. The whether can we be conquered by another country is highly unlikely. But can we get attacked? Can we get invaded? An invasion is a shipping container full of assault rifles that doesn't have human trafficking on it, but it just has insurgents. That's an invasion. That's actually an invasion via a Trojan horse. So, yeah, we could be invaded. It won't last long. It'll last as long as that Ebola virus that broke out. It won't last long. The invasion might be as eventful as the Cowboys in the Super Bowl, but I mean, it can happen. It can happen. It's more likely to happen since we have to use our soldiers to convince people to cooperate instead of using the lack of funds that they're going to make by not following instructions. It's easier to compel somebody to do as you say when you're controlling the money. It's harder to get somebody to do as you say when you can't. And that's when you got to use brute force. If I can't buy your loyalty, then I got to beat it out of you. That's the American way. So what began as a legal dispute over an emergency powers law has spiraled into a full-blown confrontation between the White House and the Supreme Court. The court delivered a clear message that the power to tax belongs to Congress, and the president cannot invent that power for himself. It was a decision rooted in the foundational principles of the Constitution. And we got to start by following the Constitution and then follow through with everything else we decide to do. He said, we'll get conquered by our own people. That is called the purge. We are looking forward to seeing a civil war happening here. And I think that in the midst of a civil war happening, especially with these ICE agents unnecessarily murdering American citizens, in that civil war, a country divided can be conquered by a country that is not divided. So if our country ends up in a you must protect yourself from yourself scenario, again, your Second Amendment is going to be necessary. So it is possible the United States of America can go back to being a Confederacy. It just requires a larger number of individuals to show up and do something. Because the only reason why we went from being two countries to one is because the North started moving before the South did. And all it takes is for somebody to do the same thing. Now, the response that occurred to what happened was not a reflection or compliance. It was immediate and furious defiance. By digging up an obscure provision from a 50-year-old trade law, the president effectively nullified the court's ruling, instantly reimposing a massive 15% global tax under a new name. So this audacious move has plunged the global economy back into the chaos of a trade war, ensuring higher prices for all of the American individuals. Now, the nation finds itself on a collision course. The new tariffs resets our questions. And while it rests on a questionable legal foundation, we're promising a fresh wave of court battles. A 150-day fuse that I'm going to be monitoring through July that has already been lit, forcing yet another shutdown through a showdown, with Congress having to come to conclusions as to what the hell we're going to do by July. They putting in overtime with this guy. Normally they only work a few months out of the year. They work a year round with him now. And all of this is unfolding under the dark shadow of the crisis that we have going on with Iran, because where tensions are already at a fever pitch high, with one economic weapon partially blunted by the courts, the risk grows that another far more dangerous tool could be used instead. We are left with a deeply troubling question. Can constitutional checks and balances function when the president is determined to find any workaround to get what he's trying to accomplish done? And what happens when a Domestic power struggle collides with a foreign policy crisis on the brink of war. The events of that last few days has made one thing clear. This is no longer just about the tariffs. It is a fight for the final say on the rules of law itself that govern this country. And with international peace hanging in the balance, you've got to ask yourself, would you give him a third term? That's a good question. Would you give him a third term? At his current age, I got to see him get past the second. But this is where we are today. Now, we got a lot of details. JT didn't come back in, so I guess he didn't have knowledge God gave a Bessie Buck. So I appreciate him for coming through to the show. I want to thank all the fellas for diving in. Michael, FX Trader, I really appreciate y'all coming into the show. I'm going to start by saying, ladies, as long as the situation doesn't make sense, I'm going to keep asking you ladies to make it make sense. So ladies, please make it make sense. We've got a good show coming in tomorrow. We're going to be talking about, he said, third term is okay. I cannot get any, can't get any worse as under Joe Biden. Well, it can't, you're right. It can't get any worse. I mean, worst case scenario, we're at war. And if we're at war away from home, the worst case scenario is gas prices are going to go up. I'm driving like 10, 20 miles a week. Yeah, I fill the tank up once every 3 months. We go to war. I'm not going to feel it. We're not going to war with any of my clients, so it's not like I'm going to lose any money. So I'm just like, I'm going to be investing in Shell, Chevron, and Exxon Mobil. So when the fuel prices go up, the shares is going to go up. So I'm just like, it's like it's a heartless dynamic to have for some people to assume. But when you think about it, wherever there's chaos, there's profits. And for those individuals that are thinking like a Republican, if you start thinking like the top 1%, and you start considering where there's profits, I'm going to get my money. Instead of me sitting over here being afraid of us going to war, I'm going to invest in some gun stores, and then I'm going to invest in the inventory so that I have the inventory and I get dividends off of my investments. That's what I'm going to be doing. You got to put your money where your interests are. If your interest is on safety, put your money on safety. If your interest is on cybersecurity, put your money on cybersecurity. If your interest is on military backing, put your money on military backing. At least as long as your money is going to where your efforts are, you will find yourself in a position where you're likely to see a return on your investment, whether it's growth in stocks, growth in shares, or dividend distributions. And if you're building the type of wealth that I've been talking about building, you can find yourself in a position where in 10 to 15 years, you're over $1 million. I was just crunching some numbers just today that putting away $1,000 or so a month, every month, in a brokerage account that's generating 17% interest. Even if you're doing it using REITs, you can find yourself with over $500,000 in 15 years with just putting away $12,000 a year. That's a $500,000 principal that's paying you like $80,000 or $90,000 a year. Anybody who's spending more than $1,000 a month on bullshit is going to be like, damn, I could not be broke right now. I could be making more money off of my brokerage account after taxes than what I'm making off of my hourly job. And that's just over time. Not even evading taxes, just paying whatever they ask for and reinvest in the principal. You can find yourself maintaining your standard of living, doing 15, 20 years and being right at $1 million. And that's doing it by yourself. So notice how 61% of individuals got 2 jobs. Notice how 70% of the married portion of individuals, everybody's got at least 1 job. Notice the fact that 2 people can come together and put their money up in the brokerage accounts where you're living off of one income and invest in the other income. You could be putting away 30 grand a year. You could be millionaires inside of 10 years. Nobody needs to be broke. You find you a partner that's not financially wasteful, nobody can be broke, right? And you don't got to work for nobody because you're living off your brokerage account. You know, and all of this can still be done while the country is in disarray. while prices are low because the country is in disarray. Stock prices are low because country is in disarray. As long as if the country stays in disarray for his entire third term, you have his entire third term to get your shit together. By the time he gets out of office, whether he gets a third term or another Republican gets a term or a Democrat comes in and dismantles some of the stuff that he does, if you get your shit together, you're going to be locked in on whatever the hell he was doing before he left. But if y'all going to sit there and sit on it, he said on break, just stopping by the Xander's on to drop my like it. I greatly appreciate that, man. We was on our way out. I appreciate you stopping by. But whenever you got time, take a look at tonight's show because we're going to be talking about a lot of stuff coming soon that's going to be directly impacting this. Tomorrow, I'm going to be talking about the dividend rotation strategy, but I am going to touch base a little bit on how the stock market has been impacted by the current fluctuations between the government shutdown and the tariff impact. So we're going to be talking about like a dual topic tomorrow, but definitely swing by tomorrow if you guys got time. And then I've already picked up, we've got like the next 12 or 14 days up on the show. So you just go through the channel on YouTube. For those of you that's watching us on Twitch and Twitter, y'all just go through the channel on YouTube and look at all the shows that we've got coming up and hit that notification button for all the ones that you're going to be attending into, because we're going to be covering a lot of details and a lot of topics that's going to benefit you guys and how you make your money, how it impacts your ability to make, save, and invest money, and how to restructuralize yourself so that you can find yourself in a better position. Because one of the things I'm going to tell you guys on the way out of the door is that I give you guys this information to help you guys become higher value men, not just by increasing your finances, but increasing your decision making. When you find things in your life that you can control and you make the changes in the things that you don't like, you find yourself in a better position in life. Then you have the capabilities of navigating around the things that you can't do. Just like Donald Trump. He didn't like what was going on. He made a few changes. He navigated around what he wasn't allowed to do and did what he could do, right? Still accomplished what he wanted to do in life. And ladies, y'all can take this information too. While this is a male-driven podcast from the male's perspective, while you ladies are here on a male-driven podcast from the male's perspective, y'all too have the capabilities of taking the knowledge that I give you guys and investing it in yourselves, figuring out what's going on with your 20-year plan. Because if you know where you want to be at in 20 years, you know how much it's going to cost to be there. You know what it takes to get there. If you start putting money aside today to get to your end goal, if it's a task, if it's an activity, if you start putting forth the effort today, one step at a time, pick something, apply yourself to it till you accomplish it. Baby steps, conquering a lot of different things in a lot of different ways until you get to where you're trying to go. Along the way, you can always stumble across somebody that has the same mentality as you, or a similar mentality and similar interests, similar goals, and y'all can be heading in somewhat of the same direction, and y'all can compound y'all's efforts to reach your goals a lot faster. One person can make it to $1 million in 20 years, and two people can make it to $1 million in 10. It is all it takes is to be dedicated to the same causes. So with that being said, I want to thank you guys for coming to This and That. I'm your host, Xander, where we talk about this, that, and everything in between, and I'll see you guys tomorrow night.
Chase validation, now I validate My network is my net worth. Choose your company wise. Surround yourself with eagles, not with sheep in disguise. Every interaction is a reflection of my brand. Quality over quantity, that's my personal command. I'm not mounted on higher ground where excellence is found. My potential knows no bounds, raising the bar, breaking ground. I'm not just living, I'm manifesting my vision, cutting through limitations with surgical precision. My expectations are my compass, my respect is my shield to mediocrity and chaos. I will never I'm not just living, I'm manifesting my vision, cutting through limitations with surgical precision. My expectations are my compass, my respect is my shield to mediocrity and chaos. I will never yield.